21 of the world's top doctors surrounded the crib in a nursery worth more than most people's homes. Every machine beeped warnings. Every expert stood helpless. The billionaire's newborn son was dying, and not a single degree on those walls could explain why. Outside the door, pushed aside like he didn't exist, stood Leo, a black gardener, a single father, a man the world had taught to stay invisible. He knew what was killing that baby. He knew how to save him. But if he opened that door, he would lose everything: his job, his freedom, maybe even his daughter. Before we dive into how this gardener risked everything to save a dying baby, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss stories like this. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from right now. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you've ever felt ignored by people who thought they knew better than you, this story is going to hit different. Let's get into it. The Harrison estate sprawled across 200 acres of Connecticut countryside, a monument to the kind of wealth most people only saw in magazines. Leo had worked these grounds for 6 years, trimming hedges that cost more than his car tending roses that received better health care than half the families in his old neighborhood. He arrived every morning at 5:30 before the mansion stirred, when the only sounds were birds and the whisper of wind through the oak trees his grandmother would have loved. She had taught him everything about plants back in Louisiana, which ones healed, which ones harmed, which ones could kill a grown man before he finished his morning coffee. That knowledge lived in his hands, now passed down through generations of people who couldn't afford doctors and had to find their own medicine in the earth. Most days, Leo moved through the estate like a shadow. The Harrison family barely acknowledged his existence, which suited him fine. He had learned long ago that staying unnoticed was a kind of protection. Keep your head down, do your work, collect your paycheck, go home to Sophie. Sophie was 7 years old, with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn streak. She waited for him every evening on the porch of their small cottage at the edge of the property, a benefit that came with the job. When Serena died 3 years ago, Leo had considered leaving, starting over somewhere else. But the cottage meant stability. For Sophie, meant she could stay in her school, meant they had a roof that didn't leak and heat that worked in winter. Serena. Even now, her name felt like a wound that refused to heal. She had been sick for months, complaining of symptoms the doctors dismissed as stress, as anxiety, as a woman being dramatic about her own body. Leo had watched her fade, had begged the specialists to look deeper, had been told repeatedly that he wasn't qualified to have opinions about medicine. By the time they finally listened, the cancer had spread everywhere. She died holding his hand, and he carried the weight of that failure every single day. The morning everything changed started like any other. Leo was pruning the wisteria along the east wing when the first helicopter appeared. Then another. Then a convoy of black SUVs tearing up the gravel driveway like the world was ending. Within an hour, the Harrison mansion transformed into something resembling a field hospital. Medical equipment arrived in crates. Doctors in expensive suits rushed through hallways with the kind of urgency that only came with life-or-death situations. Leo pieced together what was happening from fragments of overheard conversation, from the panic in the household staff's eyes, from the way Victoria Harrison's screams echoed through the walls. The baby was dying. Alexander Harrison, 6 weeks old, heir to a fortune worth more than some countries' entire economies. The child had been perfectly healthy until 3 days ago when he started refusing to feed. Then came the pallor, the lethargy, the heartbeat that slowed more with each passing hour. Richard Harrison did what billionaires do when faced with problems. He threw money at it. 21 of the most renowned pediatric specialists in the world now occupied his home, each one costing more per hour than Leo earned in a month. They ran tests. They held conferences. They ordered equipment flown in from hospitals across the country. None of it worked. Leo continued his duties, staying out of the way, but he couldn't stop listening. The medical discussions drifted through open windows as he worked the flower beds near the nursery wing. He heard the confusion in their voices, the growing desperation as one theory after another collapsed. Heart defect. Ruled out. Infection. Negative. Genetic disorder. No markers. Metabolic disease. Inconclusive. They were missing something obvious. Leo felt it in his gut before his mind caught up with the reason why. On the third day of the crisis, he was replacing mulch beneath the nursery windows when he heard a nurse describing the symptoms in detail to a newly arrived specialist. Bradycardia, vomiting, extreme lethargy, irregular cardiac rhythm that defied explanation. Leo's hands stopped moving. He knew those symptoms. His grandmother had described them 100 times, warning him about the beautiful plants that could stop a heart. Foxglove, Digitalis purpurea, the flower that gave the world heart medication, also gave it one of the most elegant poisons in nature. But how would a 6-week-old baby be exposed to Digitalis? The answer came to him that afternoon when he saw Margaret crossing the garden with a basket of herbs. Margaret was new hired 2 weeks ago as a wet nurse when Victoria's milk production faltered under stress. She was a kind woman in her 60s, old-fashioned in her beliefs about natural remedies and herbal supplements. Leo watched her heading toward the kitchen, and something cold settled in his stomach. He followed at a distance, staying behind the hedges until he reached the small herb garden near the service entrance. Margaret had been harvesting from it regularly. He had seen her out here multiple times since she arrived. Leo knelt beside the garden bed and his heart nearly stopped. Growing among the comfrey and the barrage, its leaves nearly identical to the surrounding plants, was a young foxglove. Someone had planted it here years ago, probably for its beauty, never thinking about what would happen if its leaves were mistaken for something else. The leaves of young foxglove looked almost exactly like comfrey. A person would have to know the subtle differences, the texture, the vein patterns, the way they caught light to tell them apart. Leo's grandmother had drilled those differences into him because the consequences of confusion were death. Margaret didn't know. She had been making her herbal tea to boost milk production, a practice as old as motherhood itself. And she had been picking poison, instead of medicine, drinking it, passing it through her breast milk to the baby she was hired to nourish. Leo stood up so fast his vision swam. He needed to tell someone. He needed to stop this immediately. He found the head of the medical team in the main hallway, a silver-haired man with the confident posture of someone who had never been questioned in his life. Leo approached him directly, abandoning every instinct that told him to stay unnoticed. "Excuse me, doctor. I need to speak with you about the baby." The man barely glanced at him. "The service entrance is around back." "No, sir, you don't understand. I know what's wrong with the child. It's Digitalis poisoning. The wet nurse has been—" "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Leo, I'm the groundskeeper. But I grew up learning about medicinal plants, and the symptoms you're describing match cardiac glycoside toxicity exactly. There's foxglove growing in the herb garden, and the wet nurse has been making tea from—" The doctor held up his hand, cutting Leo off with the practiced dismissiveness of a man who had perfected the art of not listening. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but we have 21 specialists working on this case. We've run comprehensive toxicology panels. If there were any foreign substances in the child's system, we would have found them. Standard tox screens don't always catch plant-based glycosides in low concentrations. You need to run a specific immunoassay for—" "Are you a physician?" Leo felt the words land like a slap. "No, sir, but—" "Then I suggest you return to your gardening and let the medical professionals handle this." The doctor turned away, already pulling out his phone. "Someone please escort this man out of the main house." Leo tried again. He tried with 3 different doctors. He tried to find Victoria Harrison to speak with anyone who would listen. Each attempt ended the same way, with security guards steering him firmly toward the door with dismissive looks that saw his uniform before they saw his face, with the unspoken message that people like him didn't get to have opinions that mattered. Then Margaret found him. The wet nurse appeared in the service hallway, her face flushed with anger, 2 security guards flanking her like she was the victim of a crime. "That's him," she said, pointing at Leo. He's been following me around the property watching everything I do. I think he's trying to sabotage the family. Ma'am, I'm trying to help. The herbs you've been picking, I know exactly what I've been picking. My mother taught me herbal medicine before you were born. Her voice rose with indignation. How dare you accuse me of hurting that baby? I would never. It's not about intention, it's about identification. The foxglove leaves look just like. Get him out of here, Margaret snapped at the guards. Before I call Mr. Harrison myself. They didn't just escort Leo out. They took him to the head of security, a stone-faced man named Patterson, who informed him that any further attempts to enter the main house would result in immediate termination and possible criminal charges for trespassing. Leo walked back to his cottage in the fading light, his mind racing, his hands shaking with frustration. He knew what was killing that baby. He knew how to stop it. And no one would listen because he was the black gardener, the man without credentials, the person whose knowledge didn't count because it came from his grandmother instead of a medical school. Sophie met him at the door, her smile fading when she saw his face. Daddy. What's wrong? Leo knelt down and pulled his daughter into his arms, breathing in the smell of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her small body against his chest. He thought about Serena. He thought about all the times he had stayed silent when he should have screamed. He thought about the baby in that mansion, its heart slowing with each passing hour, surrounded by experts who couldn't see what was right in front of them. Nothing, sweetheart, he said. Daddy just had a hard day. That night, after Sophie fell asleep, Leo sat on the porch and stared at the lights of the Harrison mansion glowing in the distance. He had two choices. He could do what he had always done, keep his head down, except that his voice didn't matter, protect what little he had by staying invisible. Or he could fight. If he fought and lost, he would lose everything. His job, his home, his freedom if they decided to press charges. And worst of all, he could lose Sophie. The court system was not kind to black fathers, especially ones with old arrests on their records, even if those arrests had been mistakes. But if he said nothing, that baby would die. Leo was certain of it now. The doctors would keep searching for diseases that didn't exist, while the poison continued its slow work on a tiny heart. He couldn't save Serena. The system had failed her, and he had let it happen because he believed that the experts knew better than he did. He would not make that mistake again. The next morning day, 4 of the baby's illness, Leo reported to work as usual. He trimmed hedges. He raked leaves. He moved through his duties like a man sleepwalking through his own life, while his mind turned over the problem from every angle. The medical team continued their frantic work inside the mansion. Through the windows, Leo could see them huddled over monitors, arguing over test results, making calls to colleagues around the world. Every few hours, another specialist arrived, another set of credentials that meant nothing against a poison they refused to consider. He watched Margaret cross the grounds twice that day, heading to the herb garden both times. Each trip sent ice through his veins. Every cup of tea she drank, every feeding she gave the baby was another dose of death delivered with loving hands. Leo needed proof, something concrete that even these arrogant doctors couldn't dismiss. That night after Sophie fell asleep, he slipped out of the cottage with a flashlight and his grandmother's old herbal guide, the one she had given him before she passed its pages soft with age and filled with her handwritten notes. He made his way to the herb garden near the service entrance, moving carefully to avoid the security patrols that had doubled since the crisis began. The foxglove was exactly where he remembered it. In the beam of his flashlight, he could see the distinctive leaves, their slightly fuzzy texture, and the pattern of veins that distinguished them from comfrey. His grandmother's book fell open to a page he had read 100 times, her careful drawings showing the differences that could mean life or death. He photographed everything with his phone: the foxglove plant, the surrounding comfrey it had grown among, the section of his grandmother's book that explained the symptoms of cardiac glycoside poisoning in precise detail. On his way back to the cottage, Leo stopped at the edge of the formal gardens where he could see the nursery wing blazing with light even at 2 in the morning. Somewhere in there, a baby's heart was struggling against a poison that the most expensive medical equipment in the world couldn't detect because no one thought to look for it. The baby wasn't sick. That was the truth that changed everything. Alexander Harrison didn't have a mysterious disease or a rare genetic condition. He was being poisoned slowly and steadily by a woman who thought she was helping him. This wasn't a medical mystery. It was a tragedy of assumptions of experts too confident in their machines to consider that the answer might lie in a garden, in old knowledge, and the observations of a man they considered beneath their notice. The following day, day 5, brought news that made Leo's blood run cold. He overheard 2 nurses talking near the service entrance, their voices tight with worry. The baby's condition had deteriorated overnight. His heart rhythm had become dangerously irregular. The team was discussing surgical intervention, implanting a temporary pacemaker to stabilize his cardiac function. Leo knew what that meant. They were going to cut open a baby who didn't need surgery, subject his already weakened body to the trauma of an operation that would solve nothing. The digitalis would still be in his system, the feedings would continue, and the stress of surgery might push his tiny heart past the point of no return. He tried one more time to reach someone who would listen. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was younger than the other specialists, maybe 35, with tired eyes that suggested she hadn't slept in days. Leo had seen her sitting alone on the terrace the previous evening, staring at the gardens with the frustrated expression of someone who knew she was missing something important. He approached her during a break in her rounds, catching her near the rose beds where he was supposedly working. "Dr. Mitchell, I know you don't know me, but I need you to hear something." She looked up, startled, then wary. "You're the groundskeeper. Patterson told us about you." "Whatever he said, it's not the whole story. Please just give me 2 minutes." Something in his voice must have reached her because she didn't walk away. She glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then nodded for him to continue. Leo spoke quickly, laying out everything he knew. The foxglove in the herb garden, Margaret's tea, the way digitalis passed through breast milk, the specific symptoms that matched cardiac glycoside toxicity perfectly. Dr. Mitchell listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "The immunoassay," she said finally. "You're talking about a digoxin immunofluorescence test." "Yes. Standard tox screens look for the pharmaceutical form, but plant-based glycosides have a slightly different structure. You need the specialized test to catch them at low concentrations." "How do you know this?" "My grandmother was a healer back in Louisiana. She taught me about digitalis before I could read. I know what it does to a heart, and I know what I'm seeing in that baby." Dr. Mitchell's expression shifted, the skepticism giving way to something more complicated. Leo could see her weighing his words against everything she had been trained to believe about who possessed medical knowledge and who didn't. "Even if you're right," she said slowly, "I'm the most junior person on this team. Dr. Crawford would never authorize a test based on the recommendation of a—" She stopped herself, but they both knew what word she had almost said. "A gardener," Leo finished for her. "A black man without a medical degree. I understand. But that baby is going to die if someone doesn't listen." Before she could respond, the glass doors burst open. Patterson emerged with 2 security guards, his face rigid with anger. "There you are. I warned you yesterday about approaching medical staff." He grabbed Leo's arm with more force than necessary. "You're done here. Pack your things and be off the property by tonight." "Wait," Dr. Mitchell said. "He wasn't bothering me. We were just—" "With respect, Doctor, this man has been harassing staff and making baseless accusations against a member of the household. Mr. Harrison has authorized his termination effective immediately." Leo didn't resist as the guards pulled him away. Fighting would only make things worse. But he locked eyes with Dr. Mitchell as they dragged him across the lawn, silently begging her to remember what he had said. The walk back to the cottage felt like a death march. 6 years of work of building something stable for Sophie destroyed in a moment. And for what they still wouldn't listen. The baby would still die. Sophie was at school, thank God. She didn't have to see her father escorted by security guards, didn't have to watch as he threw their belongings into boxes with shaking hands. He would have to explain everything when she got home. He would have to tell her they were leaving, that Daddy had made a choice that cost them their home. But when he looked at the photo of Serena on the nightstand, he knew he couldn't have chosen differently. His wife had died because people with power refused to listen to people without it. He would not let another innocent person suffer the same fate, even if saving them meant destroying his own life. He was loading the last box into his truck when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made him answer. "Mr. James," it was Dr. Mitchell, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm calling from my personal phone. I only have a minute." "What is it?" "They've scheduled the surgery for this evening. Dr. Crawford convinced Mr. Harrison that a temporary pacemaker is the only option." Her voice cracked with frustration. "I tried to suggest alternative explanations, but no one would listen to me either. I'm just the junior specialist. My opinion doesn't matter any more than yours does." Leo leaned against his truck, feeling the weight of failure pressing down on him. "So that's it. There's nothing we can do." "I didn't say that." Dr. Mitchell's tone sharpened. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know. The surgery is at 7. They'll start prepping the baby at 6:30. She hung up before Leo could ask what she expected him to do with that information. He stood in the driveway staring at his phone, his mind racing. 6:30. That gave him less than 4 hours. He thought about Serena again. About the night she died, how he had held her hand and promised that he would always fight for the people he loved. He thought about Sophie, about what kind of example he wanted to set for her. Was he the kind of man who accepted injustice because fighting it was too risky? Or was he the kind of man who stood up even when standing up might cost him everything? The answer had always been clear. He had just been too afraid to admit it. Leo got in his truck and drove away from the Harrison estate, watching the mansion shrink in his rearview mirror. But he didn't go far. He parked on a side road half a mile away, hidden by trees, and waited. At 6:15, as the sun began to set, and the estate's security shifted focus to the main house, Leo walked back onto the property. He knew these grounds better than anyone. He knew every gap in the fence, every blind spot in the camera coverage, every shadow where a man could move unseen. The surgical team was setting up in the nursery wing, which had been converted into a makeshift operating room. Leo could see the lights blazing, could see figures moving behind the windows as they prepared to cut open a baby who didn't need an operation. He had one chance, one moment, to make them listen before security dragged him away, before the police were called, before his life fell apart completely. The image of Sophie's face flashed through his mind, her smile when he came home from work, the way she curled up against him when she had nightmares, the trust in her eyes when she looked at her father, believing that he would always protect her. If he did this, he might lose her. The courts might decide that a man who broke into a billionaire's home was not fit to raise a child. He might spend years fighting for custody, might watch his daughter grow up in someone else's house, might become just another absent father that the system had swallowed whole. But if he did nothing, a baby would die. A 6-week-old child would have his chest cracked open for a surgery that would accomplish nothing, and his heart would stop on that table while 21 doctors stood around wondering what went wrong. Leo thought about his grandmother, about the generations of healers who had come before him, about all the knowledge that lived in his bones, because people like her had refused to let it die. He thought about Serena and the promise he had made to her in the darkness of her hospital room. Then he stopped thinking and started moving. The service entrance was unguarded, everyone was focused on the surgery. Leo slipped through the door and into the main house, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He moved quickly through the halls he had cleaned 1,000 times, past the artwork worth millions, past the furniture that cost more than his truck, toward the nursery wing where they were preparing to kill a baby by trying to save him. He could hear voices now. Doctor Crawford giving instructions, the beep of monitors. Victoria Harrison sobbing somewhere in the background. 2 guards stood outside the door. Leo didn't slow down. Stop right there. He pushed past them, using the momentum of his body to break through before they could react. His hand found the door handle, pulled it open, and then he was inside the room where Alexander Harrison lay on a surgical table, tiny and pale and surrounded by machines. Every head turned toward him. Every face registered shock, then outrage. Leo had maybe 5 seconds before they tackled him to the ground. 5 seconds to say everything that mattered, so he used them. The baby is being poisoned by digitalis. Check the breast milk. The wet nurse has been drinking foxglove tea. The words exploded from Leo's chest as hands grabbed him from behind. Guards seized his arms, wrenching them back, forcing him to his knees. Someone was shouting for police. Victoria Harrison screamed. The chaos was absolute. But through it all, Leo kept his eyes locked on Dr. Mitchell, who stood frozen near the surgical table, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Get him out of here," Dr. Crawford bellowed, his silver hair disheveled, his composure shattered. "This man is deranged." "Wait," Dr. Mitchell's voice cut through the noise, quiet but firm. "Just wait." The room fell into uncertain silence. The guards held Leo on his knees, their grip bruising, but they didn't drag him away. Not yet. Dr. Mitchell stepped forward, her eyes moving from Leo to the tiny form on the surgical table. Digitalis toxicity. It would explain everything: the bradycardia, the irregular rhythm, the resistance to standard treatments. Plant-based glycosides wouldn't show up on our standard tox screens. "This is absurd," Dr. Crawford said. "We've run comprehensive panels. There's no evidence of poisoning." "Because we weren't looking for it." Dr. Mitchell turned to face him directly, something shifting in her posture. "We've been so focused on finding a disease that we never considered environmental exposure. A digoxin immunofluorescence assay would detect plant-derived cardiac glycosides even at low concentrations." Richard Harrison pushed through the crowd of medical staff, his face contorted with fury. "Why are we listening to this? Get him out of my house." "Mr. Harrison." Dr. Mitchell's voice remained steady. "Your son is about to undergo major cardiac surgery. If there's even a chance that this man is right, that surgery could kill your baby instead of saving him, all I'm asking for is one test. 1 hour. If it comes back negative, we proceed as planned." The billionaire's jaw tightened. Leo could see the war playing out behind his eyes, the instinct to dismiss, to maintain control, battling against the terror of a father watching his child die. Victoria Harrison made the decision for him. She stepped forward, her face streaked with tears, her voice raw with desperation. "Do the test." Her husband turned to her, startled. "Richard, I don't care where the information came from. I don't care if it was the gardener or God himself. If there's any chance at all that he's right, we have to know." Her voice broke. "I can't lose our son. I can't." The silence stretched for an eternity. Then Richard Harrison gave a single tight nod. Dr. Mitchell was already moving, issuing orders with a confidence that seemed to surprise even herself. "Stop all feedings immediately. Draw blood for the specialized assay. Prepare Digibine, the antidote for digitalis poisoning, just in case. Someone get the wet nurse in here for questioning." The guards released Leo, though they didn't leave his side. He stayed on the floor, his arms aching, watching as the room transformed from a surgical theater into an investigation. Margaret arrived minutes later, her face pale with confusion. When Dr. Mitchell explained what they suspected, the older woman's expression shifted from bewilderment to horror to devastating understanding. "The comfrey," she whispered. "I thought it was comfrey. My mother always made tea from comfrey to help with milk production. I've been picking it from the herb garden since I arrived." Can you show us which plants you've been using?" Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. When she led them to the garden and pointed at the foxglove, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely stand. "I didn't know," she kept saying. "I didn't know. I would never hurt that baby. I would never—" No one blamed her. Looking at the plants side by side in the beam of flashlights, even Dr. Crawford admitted that the resemblance was remarkable. The young foxglove leaves looked almost identical to Comfrey. Only someone with specific knowledge, someone like Leo, someone whose grandmother had taught him to see the subtle differences, would have known. The test results came back 47 minutes later. Positive. High levels of cardiac glycosides in the baby's blood. Even higher levels in the breast milk samples they had taken from Victoria after she had unknowingly received the tainted tea from Margaret. The room erupted. Dr. Crawford immediately began barking orders for Digibind administration, his earlier dismissiveness forgotten in the rush to save his patient. Other doctors scrambled to adjust treatment protocols. Someone was on the phone with a toxicologist confirming dosages for an infant. Leo watched from the corner where security had placed him, still under guard, but no longer restrained. He watched as they injected the antidote into Alexander Harrison's tiny arm. He watched the monitors, waiting for some sign that he hadn't been too late. 20 minutes passed, then 30, and then so gradually that Leo almost missed it, the baby's heart rhythm began to stabilize. The irregular peaks and valleys smoothed out into something approaching normal. The alarms that had been screaming for days fell silent one by one. Victoria Harrison collapsed against her husband, sobbing with relief. Richard held her, his own face wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. Even Dr. Crawford's rigid composure cracked as he watched the monitors confirm what everyone in the room was afraid to believe. The baby was going to live. Leo closed his eyes and let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for days. His grandmother's face appeared in his memory, her weathered hands turning the pages of her herbal guide, her voice patient and warm as she taught him the secrets of plants that could heal and plants that could kill. He had done it. Against everything, against the system that told him his knowledge didn't matter, against the guards who tried to silence him, against his own fear of losing everything, he had done it. The moment of grace lasted exactly 12 seconds. "Arrest him!" Richard Harrison's voice was cold and flat. He had stepped away from Victoria, and the relief on his face had been replaced by something harder. "Mr. Harrison," Dr. Mitchell started, "this man broke into my home. He assaulted my security staff. He disrupted medical procedures. The fact that he happened to be right doesn't change what he did." Leo didn't resist, as the guards pulled his hands behind his back and secured them with zip ties. He had known this was coming. He had made his choice with open eyes. "Call the police," Harrison continued. "I want him charged with trespassing, breaking and entering, and assault." "Richard," Victoria's voice was barely audible, "he saved our son. And he'll have the best lawyer money can buy to argue that at his trial. But there are consequences for actions regardless of intentions." Richard turned his back on all of them, walking to his son's bedside, dismissing Leo from his attention entirely. The police arrived 20 minutes later. They read Leo his rights, documented his statement, and loaded him into the back of a cruiser, while the Harrison Estate's security staff looked on with satisfaction. As they drove away, Leo caught one last glimpse of the mansion's lights through the rear window. Somewhere in there, a baby's heart was beating steady and strong because a gardener refused to stay silent. It was worth it, he told himself. Whatever came next, it was worth it. The county jail was cold and gray, exactly what Leo had expected. They processed him, photographed him, and put him in a holding cell with concrete walls and a metal toilet. He had one phone call, which he used to contact his neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, who agreed to pick up Sophie from school and keep her until Leo could figure out what came next. He didn't sleep that night. He sat on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling, thinking about his daughter, wondering how he would explain this to her, wondering if he would ever get the chance. The next morning, a public defender came to see him. She was young and overworked and clearly skeptical of his story until he showed her the photos on his phone, which the police had confiscated, but which she was able to access as evidence. The foxglove, the herbal guide, the dated images that proved he had identified the poison before the doctors confirmed it. "This is going to be complicated," she said. "The Harrisons have a lot of influence in this county. But what you did saving that baby, it's going to matter to a jury." Leo nodded, too exhausted to feel hopeful. 2 days passed. Then on the morning of the third day, something unexpected happened. The guard came to Leo's cell with a strange expression on his face. "You're being released. All charges dropped." Leo stared at him. "What? Someone posted your bail, except there's no bail because there are no charges anymore. The Harrison family withdrew their complaint." The guard shook his head in disbelief. "You must have one hell of a guardian angel, buddy." The processing took an hour. When Leo finally walked through the front doors of the county jail, squinting in the afternoon sunlight, a black car was waiting for him in the parking lot. Richard Harrison stood beside it. The billionaire looked different than Leo remembered. Smaller somehow. The arrogance that had seemed as much a part of him as his expensive suits was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "Mr. James." Harrison's voice was formal, controlled. "I owe you an apology." Leo didn't respond. He wasn't sure he was capable of speech. "What I did having you arrested after you saved my son, it was wrong. I was angry and embarrassed and looking for someone to blame besides myself." Harrison met his eyes directly. "I spent 3 days watching my son recover, watching him get stronger, knowing that he was alive, because you refused to give up, even when everyone told you to. And I realized that I had become exactly the kind of man I always swore I would never be." "Why are you here? To make it right or to try?" Harrison pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This is a check for $500,000. It's not enough. I know it's not enough, but I want you to have it." Leo looked at the envelope but didn't take it. "I don't want your money." "Then tell me what you do want. Anything. A house, a job, your daughter's college education paid in full. Name it and it's yours." The offer hung in the air between them. Leo thought about everything he could ask for the security, the comfort, the freedom from worry that money could provide. He thought about Sophie, about the opportunities that kind of wealth could open for her. But then he thought about Serena, about all the people like her, people whose voices went unheard, whose lives were cut short because the system decided they didn't matter. "There is one thing," Leo said slowly. "My wife died 3 years ago because doctors wouldn't listen when I tried to tell them something was wrong. I don't want money. I want a foundation, a scholarship fund in her name, the Serena James Fund, to help people who fall through the cracks of the medical system. People who don't have power or money or fancy degrees, but who deserve to be heard anyway." Richard Harrison studied him for a long moment. Then, for the first time since Leo had known him, the billionaire smiled. "That," he said, "I can do." 3 hours later, Leo pulled into Mrs. Thompson's driveway. Before he could even turn off the engine, the front door burst open and Sophie came running out, her face streaked with tears, her arms already reaching for him. He caught her and held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling her small body shake with sobs against his chest. "Daddy, I was so scared. Mrs. Thompson said you had to go away, and she didn't know when you were coming back, and I thought, I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." They stayed like that for a long time, father and daughter holding on to each other in the fading afternoon light. That evening after dinner, after bath time, after Sophie had finally stopped asking questions long enough to fall asleep, Leo sat on the porch of their small cottage and watched the stars come out. The Harrison estate glowed in the distance, but it felt different now. Less like a monument to everything he would never have, and more like a reminder of what he had proven he could do. He thought about his grandmother, about Serena, about all the people who had given him the knowledge and the courage to stand up when standing up seemed impossible. Sophie appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, I can't sleep." Leo held out his arm and she curled up beside him on the porch swing, her head resting against his chest. "Daddy, were you scared when you went to help that baby?" "Yes, sweetheart. I was very scared." "Then why did you do it?" Leo looked down at his daughter, at Serena's eyes looking back at him, and he found the words he had been searching for his whole life. Because sometimes doing the right thing matters more than being safe. Because the people who came before us, your grandmother, your great-grandmother, all the way back, they gave us gifts. Knowledge, courage, love. And those gifts aren't meant to be hidden away. They're meant to be used even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Sophie considered this with the seriousness of a child who understood more than adults gave her credit for. "I want to be brave like you when I grow up." Leo kissed the top of her head. "You already are, sweetheart. You already are." Above them, the stars wheeled slowly through the darkness, ancient light traveling across impossible distances to reach two people on a small porch in Connecticut. Somewhere in a mansion nearby, a baby slept peacefully, his heart beating strong and steady, alive because one man refused to be invisible. 21 doctors with the finest educations in the world had failed. But a gardener with knowledge passed down through generations, with love stronger than fear, with the courage to speak truth to power, he had seen what they could not. Because sometimes the most important truths don't come from textbooks or laboratories. They come from weathered hands and whispered wisdom from ancestors who refuse to let their knowledge die, from ordinary people who choose to be extraordinary when it matters most.